Thank you for joining this episode of our webinar series on best practices in e-discovery. Today's session is focused on the 7 deadly sins of email and how to avoid malpractice, as well as how to use the 7 deadly sins in e-discovery. We've got a lot of information to cover today, so I'm going to get through the introduction quickly. My name is Jeff Fugit. I'm Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Lexipy, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Our webinars take place monthly and cover a variety of relevant e-discovery topics, trends, best practices, and strategies. Space is limited to the capacity of our webinar platform, and with the popularity of our sessions, I recommend registering promptly for those that are of interest to you. If you have technical issues or questions, please email us at webinars@lexipy.com and we'll address those right away. Our webinars are available online at lexipy.com for viewing via streaming video or downloadable as a PDF presentation or MP3 podcast. You'll find this webinar and a complete listing of all our webinars at lexipy.com. To be notified of future live and on-demand events, please email us at webinars@lexipy.com or follow us on LinkedIn. A little bit about Lexipy. We're based in Austin, Texas, and we provide a very affordable cloud-based e-discovery platform and services. We specialize in equipping the boutique firm with an e-discovery solution that gives them full control over the e-discovery process, complete DIY capabilities, and incredibly fast performance. We've been designated as the industry's most affordable and full-featured DIY e-discovery platform. We're the industry's fastest e-discovery processing and document review software. We deliver the industry's fastest return on investment per a study that was done last year by G2 Crowd. If you'd like a demonstration of our platform, simply email us at sales@lexipy.com and we'll get that scheduled for you. Joining us today is Nancy Regascio. She's Executive Claims Counsel for AXA XL in Bloomfield, New Jersey. She handles claims against architects and engineers with a focus on high-profile, large loss cases. She has over 20 years experience with AXA XL and XL Group and previously practiced law for 14 years in state and federal courts. As a practicing defense lawyer, Regascio specialized in defending medical malpractice cases and advising companies on employment law. She graduated with a BA in economics from Douglas College and earned her JD from Rutgers. Before I turn it over to Nancy, I'm going to ask a couple of polling questions to help set the stage for today's presentation. First polling question is, if you're willing to admit this, how often do you make mistakes in email communications? Would you say that's a daily event, a weekly event, monthly? Never, for those of you that are perfectionists out there. It'd be interesting to get your take on this because Nancy is going to go through some really fascinating elements to email. And so what you might not think is a mistake quite possibly could be. But we'll get to that shortly. All right, and as you're filling out this polling question, I'll take this time to thank you for participating in our polling questions today. And then our next polling question is, what percentage of your matters that involve e-discovery include reviewing email? All right, I'll go ahead and close that poll. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Nancy Regascio. Nancy?
Hello, everyone. I'm Nancy Regascio. It truly is an honor and my pleasure to present this webinar to you on my version of the 7 deadly sins. I'm here in my office in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I'm an attorney licensed to practice in the state of New Jersey, and I've been licensed to practice for 30 plus years. I've been in private practice, and now I am in-house at a professional liability insurance company. My employer is AXA XL. It's a subsidiary of the global insurance and reinsurance company AXA. XL offers property and casualty and specialty risk insurance with professional lines, including lawyers, professional liability, directors and officers, accountants, architects, and engineers. I'm eager to present to you the 7 deadly sins, our version of the 7 deadly email sins, and best practices for staying out of email hell. Here are the learning objectives for the next hour. And this is the agenda. I am going to present to you the 7 deadly email sins with examples, real life examples of each. And then in the second part, I'm going to discuss some 10 email best practices that should be completed for all your emails before touching send. And just at the outset, I want to point out to you that I'm trying not to be pedantic in the email best practices, because I admit that I am one of the biggest offenders in putting in the wrong address for to, and perhaps not proofreading and having spelling errors or grammar errors. And I know I'm a big offender too, because everybody's in a rush to respond and things like that happen. So I'm going to point them out, and also for me, it's a good reminder as what to do and what not to do. All right, here we go. Which email comment came from a claim against a lawyer? This is really a trick question, because all of these are actual claim cases. The first one is an excerpt from an email in which a lawyer is complaining about a client to a colleague on the case. The second one is an email from a lawyer responding to the report by the plaintiff's proposed expert witness, a report that is critical of the lawyer's procedural filings and decision-making throughout the underlying case. In that email, the lawyer, as you can see, acknowledges that he knew that his motion failed to comply with the court rules, further implicating himself while trying to explain away the outcome in that case. In also example number 2, there's which isn't shown here, but there's an email comment which says, quote, "We are embarrassed by the adequacy of our discovery responses," end quote. The third example comes from a medical malpractice action involving failure to timely diagnose cancer. The plaintiff's attorney needed to offer expert opinion testimony on the elements of standard of care, causation, and damages, but he did not identify the proposed expert witnesses within the court deadlines. These problems were driven by rigid and compressed discovery schedules and the plaintiff's attorney being short-staffed. And then the fourth example. This is an internal email from a partner to a billing manager on a case that was obviously losing money. He's telling the billing manager to charge additional time to research on the case, even though the research was not actually performed, and bill the client for it. All right, here are 2 definitions of emails. So which one do you think is correct? Well, they both are true. The first one is the definition from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and the second one is from an attorney after appearing as a party witness at a deposition. We all know the purpose of communication and, of course, emails, which is a major mode of communication. We want the recipient of the message to understand it as the author intended it. But there are complications. There are 3 that I want to discuss with you. The first one I call the Falstaff factor. You'll probably recall Falstaff. He's a fictional comic character. He's the main character of an opera by Giuseppe Verdi. Falstaff is this cowardly knight. He spends his time in the pub with these petty thieves. He lives on stolen or borrowed money, but he's vain and he's boastful, and he believes that everybody wants to hear his self-serving advice. So you know these emails with authors who suffer from what I call the Falstaff factor. The second complication is autocorrect, and I know you've experienced typing an email and seeing what autocorrect has changed in your message. If you want to type an acronym, for example, if you want to write CNA Insurance, the autocorrect turns it to CAN Insurance. You might want to type a legal phrase like res ipsa loquitur, and autocorrect changes it to test liquid form. Or you have sua sponte, and that gets changed to sue sponge. The autocorrect also affects proper names. I have a colleague whose name is Aldo, and unfortunately, he always gets addressed as also. The autocorrect completely changes the intent of the message, not just the spelling of certain words. And the third complication, at the end of the day, the font size on the screen becomes microscopic, and then your thumbs get lazy, and what you type becomes gobbledygook. So there is the purpose of communication, there's the objective, but here are complications. All right, now we're going to go into the 7 deadly sins of email. These are the 7 traditional deadly sins. They are capital vices or cardinal sins that are identified in doctrine to persuade against the human inclinations to do evil. These 7 deadly sins have been around since ancient times, and they've been resurrected in various modes. For example, you might recall the Wagner opera themes in that 15-hour epic Ring cycle that brings in the 7 deadly sins. And then more timely, the SpongeBob SquarePants fan theory. You might not know this, but the characters in SpongeBob SquarePants represent the 7 deadly sins as outlined in the Proverbs. A seemingly childish show apparently has deeper and darker roots. Now we take the 7 deadly sins and we turn them into the 7 deadly email sins. The first one is self-criticism. You're self-critical, you're confessional in your email. For example, you might say, sorry, I knew the brief lacked citations to case law, but ... The second one is blaming. You blame other people in writing and you make sure others know it. For example, if Deb hadn't opened her big mouth, or as Adam says in the Garden of Eden, the woman made me do this. She made me eat the apple. The third one is complaining. You complain about your client, the case, the judge, your team, anything. For example, the judge is so unfair, or our expert conveyed only lackluster testimony on cross-examination. The fourth one is colloquialism. You write like you speak, which is informally, and it's not always clear or precise. Email is a record of communication and not a person-to-person conversation. But unfortunately, we take the sin of colloquialism and we put it in writing and then touch send. The 5th email deadly sin is thoughtlessness. You write long emails as a stream of consciousness with numerous questions or thoughts. You don't read the full email before replying to only a part of it. The 6th email sin is self-indulgence. You love to talk about what you know, independent of the facts. For example, and I love this one, I was at the country club on Saturday night when I thought we should add a count to the complaint alleging a cause of action for ... Does it really matter where you were when you came up with this epiphany? And then the last one, too much information. You provide information that is not needed and may be used against you in the future. This is just a little chart of the 7 deadly email sins at a glance. Now we're going to address each one of the 7 deadly sins with real-life examples. The first one is self-criticism. Identifying what you could have done better doesn't have to be a confession in writing. Sometimes it's better to have an internal discussion. If you must document your criticisms, develop a firm-wide either quality management process or QA/QC process to avoid future issues. But don't put it in the case file or tie the new QM process to a specific case. You don't want this to be discoverable. We have self-critical review and analysis. It's not a privilege, but typically it's an immunity from discovery. If you're going to have some kind of QA, QC, or QM process, if you're going to have a look back and have perhaps a lessons learned or a case expose, you can do that. You can have that in writing, but file it separately. Don't have it relate to the specific case. Don't mention the name of the case and don't put it in the case file because you want to make sure that it's immune from discovery from the get-go and that you don't have to carry the burden of proof later telling the judge that this is really self-critical review and analysis and should be immune from discovery. Here is an example of the first email deadly sin of self-criticism. What should have been edited from this email before it was sent? If you take a look at this excerpt, an attorney's email response to his client, he was asked to give a litigation budget, like give me an estimate of how much it's going to cost to prosecute this case. So what should have been edited? The email excerpt undermines the author's opinions. He admits that he was wrong initially about his budget, like very wrong initially. And now he's nervous because his budget is unreliable. Here is the revision. It's revised to state just the facts without the editorial and historical detail. The second deadly sin is blaming. There are three types of blaming. The finger pointing blaming, transferring, like it's not my problem. And then CYA, which I use as communicate your astuteness, like, well, you made me do this. Here are some further definitions of the second sin of blaming. And now some really juicy examples. This was an associate's email to his important partner. He was asked to review a list and confirm the table of citations. This email became revealed in discovery. It came from the associate lawyer to the partner. In the legal malpractice case, after the underlying case, the lawyers who were the defendants in the legal malpractice case argued that the associate purportedly followed the firm's best practices in checking the legal citations. The plaintiff, the client in the underlying case, did not challenge the quality of the brief. That wasn't the issue until this email was discovered. Then that became an issue too. The takeaway on this is that this should have been an internal discussion, not an email, because it did get attached to the case file and then it was produced in discovery. So what does a reasonable client conclude when reading this email? The plaintiff argued that the lawyers had filed a motion with arguments of questionable merit and without adequate review. But after discovery of this email, the plaintiff propounded a discovery request for the time entries. Well, how much time did this associate bill for this review? The third deadly sin of email is complaining. You can have complaining, like expressing pain, dissatisfaction, or resentment. It ranges from whimpering to full-on whining. But then you have venting, which is really like take that complaining up a notch. You have a higher degree or the next degree of complaining. And here's a good example. This email was from one partner to another. I can't believe this appears in writing, but now it's saved for infinity. This disagreement reveals vulnerability. The discovery of this email enforced the plaintiff's case for legal malpractice. The attorney who authored this email was cautioned many times on sending combative and complaining emails by the firm's managing partner. But in this case, the caution was apparently ignored. The issue in this case dealt with the plaintiff's disappointment about the designated trial attorney's absence from key discovery and court events. The plaintiff alleged that the unprepared substituting attorney lost the case. This email to me sounds more like a failing romance than a professional relationship that's going sour. And no one really wants to feel your pain. So remember, check yourself. Is this venting or is this an explanation? Did we really have to write this? Was it something that should have been in writing, or could it have been reserved for a private communication, or just skipped altogether? The fourth deadly email sin is the sin of colloquialism. You may write in a conversational way. However, email is a record of our communication, and we need to avoid ambiguities in interpretation. I categorize colloquialism into three ways: qualifiers, adjectives, and filler words. And these either may help explain what you mean, or they may create ambiguity. For an example, a couple weeks ago, I was traveling down into the southern states of the United States, and I heard a comment which on the outset I thought was very thoughtful and comforting, but I realized that that was not the way to interpret things. I heard the comment, "Bless her heart." And I realized later that that is not a good-natured sentiment when expressed in Southern living, because the silent thought or the soft voice thought that follows is something like, "Bless her heart, but she's as dumb as a doornail." It's usually a precursor to an insult to soften the blow. Here are some further definitions of colloquialism. Characteristic of spoken or written communication that seeks to imitate informal speech. So qualifiers, these are limiting words. For example, he was somewhat busy, or they can be enhancing words. The puppy was rather cute. Adjectives and adverbs, these are modifiers. They usually come right before a noun. And then filler words, they're a written version of or any verbal pause that needs to be edited from our writing. So like, for the first category, qualifiers, these are poor qualifiers. You want to eliminate them. Kind of, somewhat. You don't want to dilute the intent of your message by using poor intensifier words. Either it is apparent or not, either the calculations were wrong or not. Examples of weak qualifiers. Don't say you are a bit confused, sort of tired, somewhat annoyed. Be confused, be tired, be annoyed. Another type of weak qualifier is those degree adverbs, like completely, absolutely, extremely, excessively. They're really not true adverbs. They don't modify verbs. They're not comparative or superlative, and they don't intensify. The second category is adjectives and adverbs. It's best if they're used sparingly. They can be misinterpreted. They're not specific and they don't provide context. For example, how big is huge? And what do you mean by poor? You might want to follow up with specifics if you do use them. For example, my 3 concerns about the quality of the brief are ... And the third category for colloquialism is filler words. We often think of verbal fillers such as ers, ahs, and that omnipresent like. There are filler words that we bring into our writing. For the reader, it becomes the equivalent of someone who repeatedly uses like in a conversation, undermining our sentences. Do you need to eliminate all filler words? No, only the ones that are unnecessary. So here are a few examples for rewrites. The first one would be, due to the fact that we have limited resources, this can be rewritten to because of limited resources. A second example would be, needless to say, we now need to close the office. You could change that to, we now need to close the office. The third one, in order to reach consensus, we could just rewrite that to reach consensus. And then how about, in the process of hiring new staff, we can just change that to when hiring new staff and eliminate these filler words. Okay, now the example of colloquialism. The red line text in here highlights poor qualifiers and poor use of adjectives. This is an email from, I'm going to call him Jason. It's from Jason to his boss about a meeting he attended with clients. This is an example of poor use of qualifiers, adjectives, filler words, and using email to vent. Aside from the improper use of colloquialism, the email went on to describe the clients as cheap, for example, like they would agree to pay for the new study anyway. And the email admitted that the law firm's evaluation of the client's proposed transaction was lacking. This email came about, it was preserved in the case file. When I was reviewing the law firm's e-discovery before the deadline to respond to the plaintiff's production of documents request, I realized that this would be very detrimental to the merits of our case if we produced it. I really didn't like how Jason described the clients, the plaintiffs in the present case, as cheap, and how he admitted that the proposed transaction, the evaluation of it, was lacking. We were able to settle the case before we had to produce this email, but I know the settlement was at a premium. It was the only alternative I could think of to avoid producing this harmful email. So that would be if we could have had Jason follow these email 7 deadly sins, perhaps we could have settled it for a more economical price. Okay, the 5th deadly sin is thoughtlessness. Keep messages from mobile devices short. As you know, SMS messages are limited to 918 characters and broken down into chunks of 153 characters. What does the sender really want from the recipients? Your instant reply may not address the sender's items, requiring a time-wasting second or third text or email. Here's an example of blathering. This message is 48 words long. 48 words with no clear action item or request. This example came from an internal discussion in prosecuting a personal injury action arising from a motor vehicle accident. Obviously, the sender did not take the time or even make the effort to draft a message that was easy to follow or to understand. The sender forced the recipients to figure out what the heck the message meant and what the sender was asking the recipients to do. Ending any email with thoughts is probably lazy. You know, thoughts on what? Is it appropriate to talk to the employees of the adversary in the case? Is it appropriate to interview the witnesses listed on the police report? What the heck does he want? Try to keep messages from mobile devices short. mobile writing does lend itself to poorly written long sentences or short cryptic sentences. You might consider breaking up the messages according to topic. Okay, now we're going to take this blathering email. We're going to redo it. This is so much better. The redo has fewer words, and which one is easier to act on? Do the recipients know how to respond? Yeah, the recipients surely know what the sender is asking them to do. All right, thoughtlessness. Here is another email exchange. This example comes from a case in which the defendant's attorney insisted that he had never agreed to refrain from filing opposition to the plaintiff's motion for leave to amend the complaint. The plaintiff's attorney presented this email in his defense to his client's legal malpractice action. By that time, the plaintiff was time barred from asserting a new cause of action and demanding punitive damages for his client. Okay, let's see the redo. Here we go. John Brown, WeDefendAnyone.com, should have answered each specific question. He owns his poor email response just as much as Harry Smith, the plaintiff's attorney, owns the run-on sentence with 2 questions. So the takeaway here is don't reply to an email without checking if you understood the question, understanding either your own temper or the temper of the person sending the email, and double checking to see if your instant response is correct. We're moving right along. The 6th deadly sin is self-indulgence. This indulges one's whims, desires without restraint. These 3 categories of self-indulgence all have one thing in common. They are not necessarily fact-based, or there's hyperbole. Either way is great fodder for litigation and even a better way to strain communications with your coworkers or your clients or your family. Here we go, self-indulgence with further definitions. The biggest offender for me in self-indulgence is I suspect. I recently received this evaluation letter on a case. It was 45 pages long. It wasn't a very complicated case, but the author, who was a lawyer, kept introducing, I suspect, as far as like the plaintiff's motive or the strategy of the plaintiff's attorney. I suspect this. I suspect that. Well, you know what? Suspicion isn't proof that anyone can offer into evidence at trial. So your suspicions are really not helping me. If we can just stick to the facts and your evaluation on the merits of the case, that would have helped me more than all of your like espionage and intrigue suspicion. So keep that in mind with I suspect. Okay, let's go to an example of self-indulgence. Okay, this email came about. It was really an email response from a lawyer to an inquiry by the disciplinary board. The attorney was responding to an allegation that was critical of the safeguards his firm had put in place to prevent missing deadlines. First, he acknowledged that he knew he missed the statute of limitations. Then, in trying to explain away the multiple failures of his firm's system, he demonstrated that he was aware of the system's shortcomings. But did he do anything to resolve those shortcomings? Well, no. This is a great example of a self-criminating email. If there is a concern about a mistake, indicate the specific concern and what needs to happen next. And finally, the 7th deadly sin of email is too much information. It's information without context and incriminating information offered as justification or explanation. Here are two examples. When you look at the left-hand column, with these two examples, think about what should be deleted from these two examples. So the first one, we know it's a given. New employees to your firm do have a higher risk of mistakes, and those mistakes do result in claims. It's not just an experience-related issue. It's a given. So perhaps maybe instead of saying just because he's brand new to the firm, he should be good to go, we're fine, maybe just explain he has 12 years experience in estate and trust practice. He's a benefit to the team. If you take a look at the second example, saying that you caught some of the errors does not make the other errors less of a problem. If last-minute changes resulted in errors and the client complains, what should you say? Well, ask for specific information about the complaint. And the other option might be, may we have a call to discuss this email with you? My availability is such and such a date and time. I just want to run through the takeaways for the 7 deadly email sins. Number 1, self-criticism. Don't document your self-critical analysis in case files. That includes in emails, in memos, or in lessons learned. Have an internal discussion or meeting. Don't confess in writing. If the colleague that you're trying to share the proposed draft with is from another office, maybe call up the colleague or share screens, because you can't always call somebody to come into your office and take a look at your screen before you send the document. You can share screens. That's an easy way to do it when employees are scattered about the United States or the world. And develop a firm-wide QM process or QA/QC to avoid future issues. And don't tie the subject matter in this new QM process to a specific case. Don't put it in the case file. The second one is blaming. Document action items that are identified in the meeting, but not your blaming. The third is complaining. Stick to the facts. Avoid the drama. The fourth sin is unnecessary words. Eliminate wordiness. The fifth one is you don't give a darn. Make short, full, thoughtful messages. That's the goal. And before sending instant reply, confirm that you did the following. You understood what the email was asking, and you answered the question or questions appropriately. The sixth, self-indulgence. Stick to the facts. Review and edit your emails for forms of opinion, speculation, and exaggeration. And the seventh is TMI. Review and edit your emails for unnecessary facts. All right, now we are in the second portion of this webinar, and I am going to go through with you 7 heavenly steps to optimal email to try to avoid falling into email hell. And like I said in the beginning, these are optimal steps. I admit I'm an offender of this. I don't mean to be pedantic about it, but it is always good to review these because there are some good pointers in here. Okay. These are the 10 optimizing steps. First one is know your purpose, and you want to have a strong subject line. BLUF is an acronym for bottom line up front. We're going to go into examples with each one. Here we go. The first one. Know your purpose. Why are you sending this email? What do you want from the recipient? Who is your audience? Don't use abbreviations, acronyms, or euphemisms in formal emails. Could your message be taken out of context or misconstrued by different recipients? The second one, know your purpose. What do you want from the recipient? Who's your audience? Write it in the audience's perspective in mind. For example, Friday, I had to do an email to our loss prevention manager out in the Midwest, discussing a data collection system that we have. It's called claim data collection, and we input information into it, and we call it CDC. But suppose I copied a client on that email saying that I needed the information for CDC. You can imagine that client, that email might arouse worry in the client when I'm telling him that I'm targeting him with CDC. Second is strong subject line. This is the caller ID of your email. Write an email subject line that gets a response. You want it to be concise and specific. The subject line has a purpose. It lets the recipient know why you have sent the email. You don't want someone to have to open your email and read it to figure out what you needed or wanted. For example, you might want to say, for your subject line, question on your review comments, or appellate brief action item due Wednesday. You don't want to introduce a new topic in the middle of an email thread. If you're changing the subject, create a new message with a different subject line. And here's the bottom line up front. Why are you writing? State within the first two lines of the message. Don't make the recipient read to the end to figure out what you wanted, because likely the recipient may not get there. I know you've talked to senders after you've gotten this really long stream of consciousness email, and the sender tells you, I told you in my email, and it's like, I confess, I didn't get to it. I couldn't clean up, it was like you threw up on my desk and I had to pick out the pieces and figure out what the heck it was. Don't do that to somebody. It's obviously I didn't go through it, and a phone call for clarification became necessary. This is just a point as used in journalism. Don't bury the lead. So remember, bottom line up front. State your intent within the first two lines of the email. All right. Number 4, one topic. Keep your email simple. One topic per email. It might be necessary to write 2 emails because you're dealing with 2 separate topics. That is okay. It is likely you will get a responsive answer to each email rather than just a response like asking if you're available for lunch. Yes. And taking and interpreting that wrongly to say that you will refrain from filing opposition to the plaintiff's motion. Here's some examples. The key issue is you're essentially telling the reader, this is it, pay attention, this is what I want you to focus on. Number 5, edit, edit, edit. Red flag words can be misinterpreted or misconstrued. They can create problems when used without qualification. Here are some examples. Extreme words or superlatives such as highest, all, best should be avoided if read out of context. This also includes absolutes such as slam dunk, sure winner, watertight. Words of promise, such as guarantee, certify, assure, will, shall, ensure. Ensure means guarantee. Or words with multiple meanings and interpretations. Inspect, estimate, supervise, optimize, oversee. For example, An engineer's construction observation services is not an inspection. That's a much higher elevated standard than observation. But someone unfamiliar in the construction practice will believe that they both mean the same thing. Number 6, concise. If you want someone to read your email, follow these 4 items. Some experts suggest emails should be 5 sentences or less. Yes, this means you may send multiple emails on multiple issues. Keep it simple. Write your first draft of the email, then consider what you can cut from it to make it easier to read. Is it clear? If readers have to scroll to read your message, they may not. Keep your message brief. It shows respect for your reader, and you have a better chance of it being read and responded to. If you have a difficult message to convey, say it simply and honestly, or have a verbal communication. Just following up on number 6, you want to avoid jargon. Use concrete, familiar words. Try to avoid technical jargon, qualifiers, redundancies, and generalizations. Be specific. Provide only the appropriate details. Stick to the facts. Don't complain or vent. Make your messages easy to scan with formatting and spacing, introducing new paragraphs. Add headings within the text of the email. Use formatting such as bullet points or numbered lists to make it easier to follow. And use spacing to emphasize important text. And a clear ending. Tell the recipient what they need to do. Have you included an appropriate closing? End your clear, concise email with your request. What does the recipient need to do with this email, and when do they need to reply? If they need to reply. It could be just for your information only, or I need a response by Friday. 8, proofread. Take a moment to proofread before you touch send. An instant reply means that you had no time for proofreading. Proofreading can save you time in the long run. You can see number 2 is intentionally misspelled just for this webinar. Reread your email after spell check. Did the correction change the meaning? Did autocorrect totally change the meaning or the recipient's name? And how would you feel about receiving the email you're about to dispatch? Put yourself in the reader's shoes. Confidential. Don't write anything private, confidential, or incriminating in an email. It's not private. Email is not private. If there's a claim, you know that emails marked on the subject line confidential are saying, look at me, and they are the first emails that get reviewed. Be discreet about the content. Don't ever put anything in an email that you would be uncomfortable sharing with the entire world. Don't copy people on an email unless there's good reason for it. Include only the people that need to see it. And when replying, please, please, please consider replying to only the sender, not reply to all. You've seen it when someone inadvertently replies to all, and you can feel the embarrassment for that responder. So consider, do you really need to clutter up everybody on the to list? Maybe just reply to the sender. Here's the litmus test. This is the last item. Would a phone call or direct conversation work as well, or maybe even better than this email? If you think this email will come as a surprise, pleasant or not, maybe first call the recipient and then send a summary of the call in an email. You want to review, rewrite, and review before sending. Context is important. Review your email as a third-party recipient. Can anything be taken out of context? You made it through the ask yourself 3 questions. Now ask yourself the following 3 questions. If you answer yes to these 3 questions, you're good to go. Especially the last one, reading it aloud while sitting on the witness stand. Still uncertain? Then don't send it. Typing your message has not been a waste of time because you've clarified your thoughts, you're clear about what you want to ask, and you're now prepared to support your upcoming telephone conversation or face-to-face conversation. When in doubt, take it out. If you remember only this tip from today, you will avoid a majority of your email problems. And when in doubt, pick up the phone. Maybe an in-person conversation would be beneficial, more beneficial than an electronic request. And some messages, yes, it's true, some messages are better in person than the most thoughtfully written but devoid of humanity email. You can argue a privilege applies to make the email immune from discovery, like, oh, I sent it to my lawyer. But this is only after the adversary has received a copy of the email in question. And in that case, you carry the burden of proving that the privilege or immunity applies and that you want it back and you don't want anything mentioned about that email in the litigation. And just 2 more points. Text messages. You need to have consistent file case documentation of communication. To date, email is still the most universally available way to capture written conversations with all involved parties. Email is the most important tool for communication, but it also can be weaponized, as you've seen in the examples I've provided you in the last hour. Text is very, very handy. It's easy to do when you're out of the office and you don't have email quite available to you. But text will not be preserved and it will not automatically get copied to the case file. I recognize that there are some software packages and some apps that allow team communication and text messages to be captured with those packages, but they're not readily prevalent and not many people use them. So my suggestion is if you get a text asking for a detailed explanation or a decision-making response on a case, do something like this. Got your text, please see my response sent to you by email. That shows you've responded to the text, you've answered the question, but you've done it in a documented format. You sent a reply by email. And then just one more point. Optimize your email. What best practices can you incorporate into your firm, into your cases, into your staff? Things we can do to develop our communication skills are being an active listener, removing communication barriers, dealing effectively with conflict, and never assume communication will take care of itself, because as you've seen, it won't. It's far too important an element to the success of your business to take for granted. I really enjoyed presenting this webinar to you. I hope that you find a few good nuggets to take away from this. And I thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Nancy. That was a great presentation on the potential pitfalls of email and how to stay out of email hell. When you think about the 7 sins of email that Nancy covered, not only are they important to prevent malpractice claims, but you should consider them when performing a review of emails and discovery for all your cases. I'm going to flip the script a little bit and discuss how we help you utilize the 7 sins in e-discovery in order to locate the evidence as well as privileged documents to ensure you steer clear of email hell. For more than 13 years, we've been on the leading edge of e-discovery and helped thousands of lawyers, paralegals, and e-discovery professionals with their matters. We've seen it all and incorporated that experience and intelligence into the LexB e-discovery platform. As an example, our cloud-based platform has a keyword template consisting of more than 700 profane and obscene search terms. How often do you think those come up in these 7 deadly sins of email? This can help you quickly identify communications that could support discrimination, harassment, the existence of a hostile work environment, and more. We also have deep expertise developing keyword strategies by case type. Our professional services team consists of ACET certified litigation paralegals with experience across all types of matters. When you combine their expertise with the advanced capabilities and intelligence of the LexB Discovery platform, you have a highly effective approach to your search strategy that will quickly identify the 7 deadly sins in large email sets. If you're interested about the topic of e-discovery search strategies and best practices, then you'll also want to register for our next webinar. We'll be covering that topic at length, and Erin Derby on our professional services team will be presenting, and she does an excellent job. So follow us on LinkedIn or watch your inboxes for an invite to that session. So LexB is uniquely positioned to help boutique law firms and organizations that want to keep e-discovery in-house solve for the challenges of large and growing email sets and finding evidence and privileged documents. Because we equip boutique firms with the most powerful, efficient, and easy-to-use cloud-based e-discovery platform that rivals any big law system, our on-demand cloud-based e-discovery platform not only delivers leading-edge technology performance and security, but it's a fraction of the cost of dedicated on-site infrastructure. LexB auto-scales to ensure we get you from email ingestion to review faster than anyone else. And the LexB e-discovery platform can be easily accessed by virtually any internet-capable device, including PCs, Macs, iPhones, iPads, and Android devices. Processing emails for review can be a challenge. LexB has solved this not only with our high-performance platform, but also with a comprehensive solution that delivers the largest searchable data set. So only LexB equips you with the Uber index. This is a highly advanced index that is comprised of native characters that get extracted from the emails and the attachments, OCR characters, because all those emails and all the attachments are also OCR, and translated characters. So having native and OCR characters is very important when dealing with large email sets because there are several use cases that require both in order to assemble a complete data set containing the evidence and privileged documents. For example, when you have attachments that contain scanned documents, then you need native extraction of email characters and OCR in order to pick up the characters from those scanned documents and compile or concatenate all those into the index for review. There are other instances where there may be hidden cells in Excel spreadsheets that are attached, or if there are contracts and there are notes or different review elements, then having that native character extraction is really critical to make sure that you capture all those. In addition to the Uber index, LexB also equips you with advanced technologies that are instrumental in reviewing and coding large email sets. The LexB e-discovery platform includes email threading, near-dupe groupings, which I find particularly powerful, especially when dialogues cross communication modalities, and also technology-assisted review for addressing very large document sets in a timely fashion. So these capabilities are the triumvirate of email review because they help streamline the review workflow and ensure that privileged documents don't slip through the cracks, and that you find all the instances of the 7 deadly sins of email needed for your case. All these technologies are included in your LexB subscription, so you don't have to pay extra for technology-assisted review. You don't have to pay extra for near-dupe groupings, and they're all programmed in the LexB platform, so you don't have to have multiple solutions and moving data in and out of platforms, which not only is very, very cumbersome and time-consuming, but can also cause errors. Lastly, LexB provides technical support and professional services in the event that you need them. LexB is purpose-built for DIY, as I mentioned, so you can handle everything in-house, so you don't have to have large litigation support departments or IT staff to operate e-discovery in-house. And with that, I'll ask our last polling question, and that is, would you like a demonstration of the LexB e-discovery platform? And while you're answering that, I'll go ahead and thank you for attending today's session. We will be making the following available to webinar attendees. You can get a recorded streaming version. You can access an MP3 podcast or a PDF version of today's presentation. Let us know if you have any questions or comments about this webinar or suggestions for future topics. This webinar is part of the LexB eDiscovery webinar series. And for notices of future live and on-demand webinars as part of this series, please email us at webinars@lexb.com or follow us on LinkedIn. And as I mentioned, our next session is on search strategies and best practices, and Aaron Derby on our team will be performing that session. Also, I wanted to take a quick minute and ask you to please fill out the survey at the end of today's session. Take your responses very seriously, and we love to get your feedback on these sessions to continuously improve them. And watch your inbox for an invite to our next webinar on best practices in eDiscovery. Take care.